Today is a big day for me. It's my son's 14th birthday, my 20th wedding anniversary, and I get to share the stage with Oprah. Does anyone recognize the walk-on song that I chose? The artist? Yeah, Johnny Clegg. For those of you who don't know who Johnny Clegg was, he was an iconic South African performer who passed away earlier this year. And the reason I chose one of Johnny Clegg's songs for my walk-on is because I think his life and work really epitomizes the magic that comes from making unlikely connections. Johnny Clegg bridged social, cultural, and language divides during the course of his life. He studied as an anthropologist but made his career as a musician. And he blended Western pop with African Zulu rhythms to create an incredible, vibrant music that was a symbol of hope and activism for so many. At Innovation Edge, we believe in the magic of making unlikely connections. I've just remembered I was supposed to put a slide on. There's Johnny Clegg. At Innovation Edge, we believe in the magic of unlikely connections. We've seen over and over again that when you bring together unusual combinations of people, of cultures, of contexts, it reboots our way of thinking. It challenges our deeply held assumptions, and it opens up possibilities that we could never have imagined. We explore the ways of making unlikely connections in everything that we do every day. But this event, Think Future, is our flagship connecting event, bringing together 250 change makers, entrepreneurs, inspirations from across the globe to galvanize early years innovation. Now, when we talk about innovation, it's a term that many people use, and it's been used in many different ways. So I think it's important just to spend a moment just clarifying what we mean by innovation at Innovation Edge. And this is actually come up yesterday, and Shadi spoke about in his talk. So when we talk about innovation, there are three really critical ingredients for innovation. The first is that it's a new or improved service or product or process. The second is that it must be applied to a very real and defined need. And the third characteristic, which is essential to us, and which is really where a lot of great ideas get unstuck, is that it must have the potential for impact at scale. Over the past 5 years at Innovation Edge, we've been building a pipeline of early years innovations. We source innovations from a range of different places. We look in the for-profit and the non-for-profit space. We work with these innovators to take them through a process of testing, developing a prototype, a proof of concept, developing a working model for their product. And those that we think really have the potential for impact at scale, we work with the teams to help transition them through that very challenging scaling phase. For those of you who've opened your goodie bags, you'll see that there's a little booklet like this, which talks more about our work at Innovation Edge. At the end of the day, our goal is to transform early life experiences of young children so that more children can start school on track with all of the benefits, the lifelong benefits that come with that. We have a very small, dynamic team. There are 10 of us. But we have a lot of fun, and we've learned many valuable lessons along the way. Some of the innovations that have come through our pipeline are innovations that allow us to customize learning to the needs of the individual child, innovations that allow us to reach caregivers, teachers, practitioners where they're at and help to nudge behaviors through daily prompts, innovations that allow us to support and decentralize high-quality services to children wherever they're at, innovations that are designed to improve systems efficiency within government. And finally, we've supported innovations that allow us to understand what kinds of interventions work for which children and under what circumstances. With all of this experimentation, we've learned many valuable lessons. And I'm going to focus really today on sharing 3 key considerations that I think are really critical for galvanizing early years innovation. As Nicole mentioned, I'm a bit obsessed with alliteration, so I managed to come up with 3 V's. So, The first thing I'm going to speak about is Vogues. I'm going to be discussing 10 trends that I think are really worth watching and worth working with. I'm going to be tempering that a little bit with a reality check around some of the important values that I think really need to ground our work in innovation. And finally, I'm going to be reflecting a little bit on vulnerability. This is what I think is really at the heart of it all, and I think it's something that's come through as a golden thread over the last couple of days at Innovation Edge. So let's get started. Phil Fisher opened up on Monday evening speaking about the neuroscience. There is a growing body of evidence globally telling us that the early years really matter. This body of evidence is coming from fields as far apart as neuroscience and economics, but the message is the same, that if we invest in young children, the returns are remarkable. And the opposite is also true. If we fail to provide positive early life experiences for young children in the first 6 years of their life, the consequences are potentially dire. Now, concerted efforts have been made to translate this complex neurological, behavioral, and economic data into information that's accessible to a broad range of stakeholders. And this is a really exciting trend. We're seeing, for example, the complexities of neuroscience being translated for parents into simple messaging around the serve and return interactions for responsive caregiving. And for business leaders and and investors, we're seeing terms like return on investment and human capital development being used to encourage them to act. And through the growing body of evidence and the efforts made to communicate it to stakeholders, this is starting to drive change. This brings me to my second trend. We're seeing changes in the funding and philanthropy landscape. This is partly as a result of the growing body of evidence and other forces. What we're seeing is that many of the philanthropists that were previously focused on funding higher education, tertiary or secondary education, are starting to realize that they have to invest earlier, that the foundations for learning have to be laid before school even starts. Philanthropists are also becoming a little bit more adventurous with their capital. We're seeing, for example, innovation challenges emerging. Some funders are even taking their endowment capital and investing it in mission-aligned financial investments. And we're seeing funders and funder coalitions increasingly getting behind large-scale systems change. This is an exciting trend for us to be working with. Something that's also really exciting for us is the fact that there are a broader range of funders now coming into the development space. In the US, for example, we've got leading venture funds, equity firms, and impact investors that are now putting their money into development issues and into early childhood. The term impact investing is used now quite often. Essentially what it is it refers to investments that require or are looking for both a social and a financial return. And impact investing is a booming market. Between 2013 and 2017, the impact investing market grew fivefold, and it doubled again over the last year. And the really cool thing for us is that impact investors are aligning their targets with the Sustainable Development Goals. And guess what? 15 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals can be traced back to early childhood interventions. This is a trend that those of us who are interested in early childhood have got to work with. Another interesting funding move is the increase in emphasis on gender lens investing. What does this mean? It means that funders want to understand whether their investments are making a difference to women. Once again, this is a great opportunity for those of us working in the early childhood space. Early childhood interventions and services, the one place where women entrepreneurs dominate. And investing in early childhood care and education and health has a disproportionate impact on women who carry the burden of care. That brings me to this, which is another trend. There's an increased demand for childcare globally. This is in part because parents are beginning to understand the importance of early childhood and the importance of their children attending 2 years of a high-quality early learning program. But there are other global forces at play. For example, there are more women entering the workforce or looking for work. There's urbanization, migration. So that there's a demand for childcare in a variety of different settings. In South Africa, like I think most other countries in the world, there is no universal state provision of childcare services. So this means that childcare services and early learning programs are typically delivered by entrepreneurs, and usually female entrepreneurs, with parents as paying customers and some state subsidization. Now, this is not an ideal context by any means, but those combination of characteristics of the early childhood service landscape make the conditions ideal for entrepreneurship and for innovation. We heard yesterday about the power of technology. Now, technology is not a panacea for all development challenges, but it is an enabler of innovation, and it's a trend that we have to work with in the early childhood space. Almost half of the population of sub-Saharan Africa has access to a mobile device. Innovators in finance, in education, in health are using this to transform services on the continent. Once again, for those of us involved in the early childhood space, there are some exciting opportunities. Most of the parents of children under the age of 6 are Gen Y and Gen Z generation, which means that they are more likely to be digitized, have an access to a mobile phone, be connected, be informed, and be social. This is an incredible opportunity for us. And with wide-scale uptake of things like WhatsApp, we have the opportunity to customize our interactions with caregivers, with health service providers and teachers and practitioners through the use of things like conversational bots. And of course, when you use technology, you're automatically collecting information on user levels of engagement, who's using it, who's accessing it, who's sufficiently engaged, which means that we have good data. This is a trend that we at Innovation Edge are particularly excited about, the idea of greater corporate citizenship. There's this very simple concept that's landed within business and that's really growing. And that is that businesses can do well by doing good. And that doing good does not have to be the exclusive domain of corporate social responsibility. Doing good can be baked into core business processes, products, and people. There are many different terms for this now. In addition to corporate citizenship, people talk about purpose-driven businesses, they talk about benefit corporations, and things like shared value. And there are plenty of opportunities for us to harness this trend. At Innovation Edge, for example, we've been experimenting with shared value opportunities in the retail sector, in production, marketing, communications, and we've really had great success in this. Why are business interested in working with us? There are a couple of reasons. Firstly, governments are increasingly creating enabling legislation and sometimes enforcing legislation to get businesses to be more citizen-minded. But also, customers are becoming more mindful of businesses' sustainability credentials. And if businesses want to attract top talent, millennials want to know that the businesses that they're working for have impact in mind. What this means is that there are a growing number of businesses who have demonstrated some incredible ways of achieving impact through shared value. And we now have some great stories to tell. One of the important points of a good story is the storyteller. And we tend to listen to people who we trust, who we know, who are in our social and professional networks. So it's really exciting for me that the pool of messengers who are taking forth the message around early childhood is growing and diversifying. This is a picture that was taken on the stage 2017, Think Future 2017. It's Ian Gawley. Ian, are you in the audience? The creative director of a company called Barrows. Now, I want to just share this example because I think it's a brilliant example of shared value, but it's also a great example of the power of the messenger. So, Ian is, as I said, the creative director of Barrows. It's a design and a production company that produces those cardboard display units that you see at retail outlets like Pick n Pay or ShopRite. Ian realized that every time a job went through the print run in their factory, there were white spaces on that job, and that he could print educational materials on those white spaces. So every time a job went through the machines, he was automatically producing educational materials at little or no cost to himself and at no cost to the end beneficiary. And they're currently producing in excess of 25,000 educational materials a month and distributing it to the places that need it most. Now, and the amazing thing about this, which is really critical for its sustainability, is that the production is completely integrated into business processes. And Ian was saying the other day, of their 180 staff, it touches their lives every single day. This is not something that's outsourced to CSI. It's fully integrated. After Ian presented at Think Future, he was invited to present the idea to business leaders at a Ready Nation conference in New York. Now, Ian's business credentials made him the perfect person to be carrying the message forward. And I think this is really a trend that we all need to galvanize behind, providing a diverse group of messengers with the tools and the resources and the information they need to be carrying the message forward around early years innovation. Another exciting workplace-based, business-based innovation around early childhood is workplace-based Educare. Businesses are beginning to understand that it makes good business sense to offer their employers' children workplace Educare, so essentially preschool services and childcare at the place of work. In the US now, about 20% of the largest employers are now offering workplace-based Educare, and they're seeing massive productivity gains. They're seeing, for example, much higher rates of women returning from maternity leave. They're seeing greater rates of staff retention, and they're seeing 20% increase in the proportion of women who are holding senior leadership positions. With the globalization of the workforce, this presents a very interesting trend, because companies in more advanced economies are outsourcing or decentralizing their workforce to get cheaper labor in less developed countries. If we can harness this trend to encourage companies to extend the workplace-based Educare beyond their head offices into these decentralized sites, we have the opportunity to provide high-quality Educare in areas where it's most needed. And finally, talk about something called decentralized power. Now, Jeremy Haymans and Henry Timms, this book called New Power, I don't know how many of you have read it, speaks about the idea that human beings have always connected for collaborative action to drive change. But that until recently, participation in collaborative action was limited by our geography and by our access to information. With the hyperconnectivity that we have today, more and more people are able to get involved, to participate in movements for change, and there's an increasing sense of agency that comes with that. This is the magic sauce behind big businesses like Airbnb and Uber, crowdsourcing platforms like Ushahidi, movements like Me Too and Black Lives Matter, and open source software platforms like GitHub. There's an incredible opportunity here for us to think about how we harness the power of decentralized power to increase levels of participation and agency amongst the people that we are trying to serve. So, I know I use the word excited a lot in those. So you can see that I get pretty excited by these trends. I think that they provide incredible opportunities for those of us that are in the early childhood space to be thinking anew about what we do and how we do it. But I also think, really importantly, that these trends provide potential entry points for people outside of the space to get involved in early childhood. But, and this is a really big and important but, we need to make sure that all of our actions as we harness these trends are grounded in good values. Our lofty ideas and risky innovations must be tempered with care. On Monday evening, Nicola Galambek spoke about this when she spoke about the pursuit of unicorns and the need to be cautious. I'm going to talk about two values that I just really want to emphasize that I think are critically important. And what I think is amazing is that they've actually both come up already during the course of the conversations at this event. So the first value is that of inclusivity, and the second is a commitment to do no harm. The funding landscape that I've just described is an example of the lack of inclusivity in the development space. While there are a growing number of investors interested in early childhood, this funding is not directed at everybody. So, for example, there's a company called Village Capital. They provide early-stage funding for startups that are seeking to address major development challenges. They also do a survey regularly where they look at the trends within the allocation of venture capital. Now, the term venture capital is used to describe investment in any sort of slightly higher risk initiative, and it's usually new businesses or businesses that are going through a transitioning scale. So that means we're talking about investment in innovation and entrepreneurship. Their survey found that women receive less than 2% of venture capital globally in 2017. Now, you might be thinking, well, maybe less women apply for venture capital. Well, it turns out that men are 60% more likely to receive funding than women when pitching the exact same idea. 1%, less than 1% of venture capital goes to people of color. And most funding, over 90% of funding that's gone into local startups in East Africa, went to startups where they had at least one expatriate founder. And here's a fairly mind-blowing fact. Since 2013, more venture capital has gone into the Bay Area of the United States than into India, Latin America, and Africa combined. Why do these stats matter? They tell us that the people who are getting the funding to solve development challenges are not the people who are facing the development challenges. If we're striving for inclusivity and innovation, we need to be mindful of who we are trusting and investing in to solve development challenges. We also need to be mindful of the inclusivity of beneficiaries. Now, I've spoken about the fact that we have wide-scale uptake of mobile, and that's really, really exciting. But the reality is 35% of people over the age of 15 in sub-Saharan Africa cannot read. So if we design text-based messages for parents of young children, they will not be accessible to those people. So we have to make sure that we don't adopt a one-size-fits-all solution. And another one that really comes to mind is the issue of disability. There are so many people. Yesterday we heard from Lucky around just some of the really basic exclusions that people with hearing disabilities face, and that's true of all other forms of disabilities. And as I was thinking about this presentation, I reflected on another kind of exclusion that we need to be mindful of as we promote more and more innovation within the development space. And that is that there are thousands of men and women who are working at the coalface of development challenges, whose work may not be considered innovative or entrepreneurial, but every day they save lives and they change lives. Striving for inclusivity means that we must make sure that those coalface development workers are not sidelined. As innovators, we can reach new heights by standing on the shoulders of these giants. We must make sure that their work is recognized and that their commitment and knowledge is leveraged and not lost. And finally, the second value that I wanted to speak around is really, it feels like so simple that it shouldn't even need saying, but I think it really does, is the fact that at the very heart of everything, we must seek to do no harm. With more business and investment interest in development with the use of exponential technologies, there is a risk that our innovation is done at the expense of the poor. And we need to make sure that in everything that we do, we keep front of mind the potential unintended negative consequences of our actions. Now, in keeping with the theme of Think Future, I wanted to spend a moment reflecting on perspective, and in particular, the topic of vulnerability. In 2014, when I was asked to set up Innovation Edge, I had a pretty good sense of the incredible opportunity that it would provide for me for professional development. What I didn't fully anticipate was the level of personal development and reflection that would be needed. I realized that I was really scared of failure. I realized that too much of my sense of self-worth was caught up in how other people were seeing me and receiving me, and that if I wasn't able to fail, I wasn't going to be able to innovate. And then I came across this book by Brené Brown called Daring Greatly, and she speaks about this so beautifully. She talks about the fact that in order to be an innovator, you have to be comfortable with a level of uncertainty, you have to be comfortable with your vulnerability. She says that we need to be able to separate our sense of self-worth by the products that we put out into the world, because putting innovations out into the world calls for criticism. It's a necessary part of the creative process. When our self-worth isn't on the line, we are so much more willing to be brave and to share our raw talents. And similarly, if a sense of self is important for our own ability to fail, then sensitivity is important to allow others to fail. For the last 2 years, I have been involved in a fellowship program run by the D.G. Murray Trust, where they bring on board young, emerging leaders within the development space. And the workshop that I run with these dynamic, amazing young people is really looking at what some of the limiting and liberating characteristics are of organizations that allow people or don't allow them to be creative and innovative. And in this workshop, we look at all sorts of things from governance structures and funding structures to beneficiary risk. But the thing that comes out again and again as the greatest limiting or liberating factor for these young people is the extent to which they feel safe enough to fail. And their fears of failure are totally interwoven with issues of gender, with race, with age, and with levels of experience. So as leaders and managers in this space, we need to make sure that we create the kind of workplace cultures that embraces failure, that allows for imperfection in the pursuit of excellence. Another great quote from Brené Brown: in our workplace cultures, removing the pressures of perfection and the desire to please liberates the mind to be unhindered and creative. Brené Brown takes the title of her book, Daring Greatly, from a very well-known speech by Theodore Roosevelt. And I'm going to end with a slightly paraphrased version of this here. And I think this is as true of innovators as it is for those development workers at the coalface. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man or woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if she fails, at least fails while daring greatly. As you continue your journey through Think Future and beyond, I encourage you to embrace the power that lies in vulnerability, and to lead and listen with sensitivity so that you and those around you can enter the metaphorical arena and dare greatly.